In the early hours of the invasion of Poland, a sound tears through the sky. It's not thunder, it's not an engine, it's a scream, a mechanical shriek that seems to come from hell itself. Soldiers on the ground look up and see a dark triangle falling at impossible speed. Some describe the air trembling. Others say the noise paralyzed their entire body. Seconds later, impact, explosions, chaos, silence. That sound, the wail of the Jericho Trumpets, would forever change modern warfare. And the most ironic part? The plane that produced it, the Stuka Ju-87, had been considered a useless project, slow, clumsy, incapable of competing with enemy fighters. But history is full of underestimated machines that find their moment. This is the rise and fall of Europe's most feared bomber, the ultimate psychological weapon that turned the sky into a scream.
The Junkers Ju-87, the Stuka. If you look at photographs of it today, you might wonder how this thing ever flew at all. It looks wrong, like someone designed it backwards. Inverted gull wings, bent downward like a bird frozen mid-dive. A fixed landing gear that hung beneath the fuselage like exposed bones. An underpowered engine that wheezed more than it roared, and a top speed that barely exceeded 240 miles per hour, laughable compared to the fighters of its era. It was a dive bomber, but even that classification seemed generous. Most aviation experts looked at the Stuka and saw a relic, a machine already obsolete before the war even began. A dinosaur with wings. One British intelligence officer famously wrote, "The Ju-87 is an aircraft that belongs in a museum, not a battlefield." Even within the Luftwaffe, opinions were harsh. Pilots joked that flying a Stuka was a death sentence. Engineers worried it would tear itself apart in combat. Commanders questioned whether it was worth the fuel. And yet, Hermann Göring, head of the Luftwaffe, insisted on its production. Not because he believed in it, but because Germany needed something that could deliver precision strikes fast. The Stuka was born not out of brilliance, but out of desperation.
The early days of the Stuka program were a disaster. Test pilots reported severe vibrations during steep dives. The airframe shuddered violently. Some said it felt like the wings might snap off at any second. In one training accident, a prototype did exactly that, disintegrating mid-flight and killing the pilot instantly. Engineers scrambled to reinforce the structure, but every fix added weight, and weight meant slower speed. Slower speed meant vulnerability. Meanwhile, competitors mocked the project. Messerschmitt engineers dismissed it as Göring's flying brick. Heinkel designers called it the slowest way to die in the air. Even within Junkers, morale was low. The lead designer, Hermann Pohlmann, faced constant pressure. Göring wanted results, fast. But the Stuka kept failing tests. At one point, the project nearly got cancelled. But then, during a series of final evaluations in 1937, something unexpected happened.
A test pilot named Hans-Ulrich, one of Germany's greatest World War aces, took the Stuka into a near-vertical dive, 90 degrees, straight down. The plane screamed, the engine howled, the airframe rattled and groaned, but it held. And when Udet released the bomb, something remarkable occurred. It hit within meters of the target. Surgical precision. That had never been possible before. Horizontal bombers dropped their payloads from altitude and hoped they hit something. But the Stuka could put a bomb exactly where you wanted it. Udet climbed out of the cockpit, visibly shaken, but grinning. "This thing," he said, "is a flying artillery piece." Suddenly, the flaws didn't matter as much. Yes, it was slow. Yes, it was vulnerable. But it could do something no other aircraft could. Deliver devastation with sniper-like accuracy. The Stuka wasn't a traditional bomber. It was a tactical strike weapon, a precision instrument of destruction. Goering saw the potential immediately. The Stuka wasn't meant to dogfight. It was meant to support ground troops, destroy fortifications, and break enemy morale. But there was one more idea brewing in Goering's mind. Something darker. Something psychological.
In 1938, Goering issued a strange order to the Junkers engineers. Install sirens on the Stuka's landing gear. Not for communication, not for navigation, for terror. The sirens were simple wind-driven devices. As the Stuka dove, air rushed through them, creating a rising, wailing howl, a sound unlike anything heard in warfare before. The frequency was specifically chosen, around 500 to 600 hertz, a range that triggers primal fear in the human brain, the kind of sound that makes your stomach drop, that makes your muscles freeze. They called them the Jericho Trumpets, after the biblical walls brought down by sound, and they worked exactly as intended. First combat test, Poland, 1939. September 1st, 1939, the invasion of Poland begins. Polish soldiers are dug in along defensive lines. They've heard rumors of German air superiority, but nothing prepares them for what comes next. At first, it's just a dot in the sky, then another, then a dozen. The Stukas approach in formation, slow, methodical, almost leisurely. And then, one by one, they tip forward, nose down, wings angled, falling like stones, and the sound begins. A low moan at first, then a rising shriek, then a full bone-rattling wail that seems to vibrate the air itself. Soldiers on the ground freeze. Some drop their weapons. Others curl into fetal positions. A few try to run, but their legs won't obey. One Polish officer later wrote, "It wasn't the bombs that broke us. It was the sound. You couldn't think. You couldn't breathe. You just waited to die." The Stukas pull out of their dives at the last possible second, sometimes just 200 feet above the ground. The bombs hit with surgical precision. Bridges explode. Supply depots vanish. Columns of troops scatter like leaves. And then, silence. The Stukas climb back into the sky, slow, deliberate, already hunting their next target. In those first few days, the Stuka proves itself not just as a weapon, but as a weapon of terror. Change in perception. Within weeks, the same generals who had dismissed the Stuka as obsolete are now calling it indispensable. "The scalpel of the sky," one commander writes. "The hammer of the Blitzkrieg," says another. Pilots who once dreaded flying it now volunteer for missions. The accuracy, the impact, the sheer psychological effect. It's unlike anything in military aviation. German morale soars, enemy morale collapses, and the myth of the Stuka begins to grow. By the time Poland falls, the world knows the Stuka isn't
just a plane. It's a nightmare with wings.
May 1940. The invasion of France begins. The Blitzkrieg is in full effect. Panzer tanks roll across the countryside, smashing through defenses. Infantry follows. And above it all, the Stukas circle like vultures. Their role is simple: clear the way. A bridge needs to be destroyed, send in the Stukas. A fortified position blocking the advance, send in the Stukas. A column of retreating troops clogging the roads, send in the Stukas. They dive, they scream, they strike. French soldiers describe it as mechanical thunder. Some compare it to the sound of demons descending. Others say it felt like the earth itself was screaming. One French infantryman later recalled, "When you heard that sound, you knew something was about to disappear from the map. You just prayed it wasn't you." The coordination between ground forces and Stukas is flawless. Panzer commanders radio in targets. Within minutes, the Stukas appear. Within seconds, the target is gone. It's warfare at a pace the world has never seen, and the Stuka is the tip of the spear. Dunkirk. Late May 1940. The beaches of Dunkirk. Over 300,000 Allied troops are trapped, surrounded, desperate to evacuate across the English Channel. And the Stukas are hunting. They come in waves, dive after dive after dive, targeting ships, boats, troop positions on the beach. The sound of the Jericho Trumpets echoes across the water. Soldiers huddled in the dunes press their faces into the sand, hands over their ears, praying. British destroyers try to provide cover. RAF Spitfires and Hurricanes engage the Stukas when they can, but there are too many, too fast, too coordinated. One British sailor described it: "You'd hear the scream and your entire body would lock up. You couldn't move. You'd just watch it fall and wonder if this was the one that would kill you." Over the course of the evacuation, the Stukas sink dozens of ships. Hundreds of men die in the water, in the sand, on the decks of burning vessels. But the evacuation succeeds. The majority of the troops escape. Still, the memory of that sound, the wail of the Stuka, haunts them for the rest of their lives. Greece and Crete. April 1941. The Balkans. German forces invade Greece, and then Crete. The terrain is brutal: mountains, cliffs, fortified positions carved into rock. Perfect targets for the Stuka. They attack bunkers with pinpoint accuracy, drop bombs into narrow ravines, obliterate coastal defenses. Allied troops dug into mountain fortresses have nowhere to hide. The Stuka finds them, always. One New Zealand soldier wrote, "We thought the mountains would protect us, but the Stukas came anyway. They dive between the peaks, screen past our positions, and blow us to pieces. It felt personal, like they were hunting us one by one." By the time Crete falls, the Stuka's reputation has reached mythic status. It's no longer just a plane. It's a symbol, a promise of destruction, an omen. The legend grows. By mid-1941, the Stuka pirates are celebrities. The most famous is Hans-Ulrich Rudel, a quiet, unassuming man who becomes the most decorated German pilot of the war. Rudel flies over 2,500 combat missions. He destroys over 500 tanks, 150 artillery pieces, a battleship, and countless other targets. he perfects the art of the dive. Vertical drops, last-second pulls, bombs released with surgical precision. Other pilots follow his techniques. The Stuka squadrons become legends. But legends are fragile, and the world is about to change.
The RAF discovers the weakness. August 1940. The Battle of Britain. The Luftwaffe launches its campaign to destroy the RAF and invade England. Stukas are sent in to attack British airfields and radar stations. But this time, things are different. The RAF is ready. Spitfires and Hurricanes intercept the Stuka formations, and what happens next is devastating. The Stuka, for all its precision, is slow. In a dogfight, it's helpless. Its fixed landing gear creates drag. Its lack of speed means it can't escape. Its light armament means it can't fight back effectively. RAF pilots describe shooting them down as target practice. One British pilot later said, "The first time I saw a Stuka in my sights, I almost felt sorry for it. It was like shooting a bird that couldn't fly fast enough to escape." Within weeks, the Luftwaffe loses dozens of Stukas. Entire squadrons are decimated. Göring has no choice. He pulls the Stuka from the Battle of Britain. The terror ends when the enemy learns to look up. 2. Eastern Front. June 1941. Operation Barbarossa. The invasion of the Soviet Union. At first, the Stuka thrives again. Soviet air defenses are weak. The Luftwaffe dominates the skies. Stukas hammer Soviet positions, tanks, and fortifications. But as the war drags on, things change. Soviet industry ramps up. New fighters, Yak-9s, La-5s, begin appearing. Soviet anti-aircraft defenses improve. The Stuka, once a predator, becomes prey. Pilots fly missions knowing they might not return. The sirens are eventually removed, not for psychological reasons, but because the drag slowed them down too much. Without air superiority, the Stuka is a death trap.
Total decline. By 1943, the Stuka is obsolete. It still flies missions, but now it's a relic, a symbol of a war that Germany is losing. Pilots joke grimly, "The Stuka doesn't scream anymore. We do." Final pilots. A Stuka pilot named Joachim writes in his diary, "Every time I take off, I wonder if I'll come back. The plane is old, the enemy is everywhere, but we keep flying because there's nothing else left." Another pilot, Hans, survives the war. Years later, he's asked what he remembers most. He says, "The sound. Not the one we made, the one we heard when enemy fighters locked on to us. That was the real scream." Symbolic end. By 1944, the Luftwaffe has lost control of the skies. The Stuka, the plane that once ruled the air with terror, is grounded. The psychological weapon becomes a memory. The scream fades. A noisy machine that changed history. The Stuka was never the best plane. It wasn't the fastest. It wasn't the most modern. It wasn't even the most effective. But it had something no other machine ever had: sonic panic. It was the first weaponized psychological terror delivered from the sky.
A machine designed not just to destroy, but to break the mind. And for a brief, terrible moment in history, it worked. The Stuka taught the world a lesson. In war, fear can be as powerful as firepower. Not every weapon wins by being superior. Sometimes you win by making your enemy too afraid to fight back. The Stuka proved that the most devastating weapon isn't always the one that kills the most. Sometimes it's the one that screams the loudest.